Today continues the series of interviews with Democratic candidates who are running for Congress on the Kristen, SuperCrip, Milefchik Ringside Report Show, bringing you Tom Palzewicz, who is running in Wisconsin's 5th District. Hey, and welcome back to the Kristen SuperCrip Milefchik Ringside Report Show. We are only 25 days away from the election, and today is my 6th interview with the Dem candidate running in it. If you haven't watched my other interviews, check them out and sure to support these wonderful people who are trying to make a difference in this time when we're so desperately in need of change. Today, my guest is Tom Palzewicz. Is that correct?
You said it very well. Nice. Thank you.
Hey, mine's Milefchik, and people get that wrong all the time. So I have empathy for people with, complicated last names.
Sure. Thank you.
Tom is running in Wisconsin's 5th District. Welcome, Tom, and thanks so much for joining us on my show today.
Well, thank you, Kristen, and it's a pleasure to join you today.
Great. So first of all, Tom, tell us about where you grew up, what childhood was like, and did you ever imagine you'd end up being involved in politics when you were younger?
Yeah, so I grew up, I've lived in Wisconsin my whole life except for a stint when I was in the Navy. But yeah, I grew up, my parents are from the UP, Michigan's UP. So I still have lots of relatives in the UP. I still go up there on a regular basis. It really should be part of Wisconsin, but we won't get into that whole argument. So, my parents moved down to Milwaukee in the late 50s. My dad started working in the, I think it was American Motors plant. That was his first job in Milwaukee. And then he eventually got a job at A.O. Smith, which made car frames. It was one of the largest employers in Milwaukee. And it was one of the places you could go and not have a college degree and get a well-paying job. It was a good union job. And so I grew up on the north side of Milwaukee and eventually moved to one of the suburbs in Milwaukee near North Side. And just had your usual Midwestern, I would say, childhood. And I went off to college in Madison. So I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison for a couple of years. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it really dawned on me, like, I need to figure out what direction I want to go. So I joined the Navy. So I walked in the recruiter's office and said, sign me up. He had me take a couple of tests. He said, you're perfect for the nuclear Navy. So I spent 6 years in the Navy, 4 of them on a nuclear submarine, and traveled around the world. I was an electrician. I think one of my strangest memories was laying on top of the nuclear reactor, changing the light bulb above it. And, I'm in a full hazmat suit and I'm just laying there. I'm like, I don't think too many people lay on top of nuclear reactors. So, but the thing that I learned in the Navy was really servant leadership. Because one of the things I realized when I got to my submarine is there were 100 guys on the sub, and I didn't necessarily have to like everybody, but I did have to respect everybody, because their job and my job were all about keeping everybody safe and making sure everybody knew what they were doing. Mm-hmm. So that group respect and that mutual trust was something that I learned very early, but I also learned about leadership, which is leading from all different levels, but leading for the good of others and not for what I necessarily wanted. Mm-hmm. And that carried through today. So got out of the Navy and I came back to Wisconsin because I lived all over the United States when I was in the Navy, and then I traveled around the world. But the Midwest. The Midwest is it's a great place to live, especially in the summer. And I just moved back here, went back to school, met my wife, and we're celebrating our 30th anniversary next week.
Congratulations!
And we raised 3 great kids. They're all in their late to mid 20s, and I've just had a great life here in Wisconsin. And the thing is, when I was a kid, I read a lot about history, and I read a lot of autobiographies and biographies by politicians. And I always thought, like, these are the people that can fundamentally, if you know what to do and how to do it, can make some major changes in our society. And that was always in the back of my head. Mm-hmm. And as I was a huge Abraham Lincoln fan. And I think I read every single book I could find on Abraham Lincoln. And, it really taught me that you could lead and not let your ego get in the way. And so the goal was more important than who you were doing with and what you're, and how those interpersonal reactions played out. Because true leaders let people need who they need to be, but help keep them focused on and inspiring toward a goal. Yeah. And I learned that as a very young kid, and I've been carrying that my whole life. So when I got out of, I graduated with an accounting degree, and I always knock on wood, I didn't become an accountant, but I did become a banker for 15 years, and I did risk management for banks. And I learned about the economy because I had to deal with Wall Street every single day. And it really taught me how the economy works. I had to watch the economy and what happened to the bond market every single day. And I learned a lot, but it wasn't fulfilling. So my brother and I started a business about 15 years ago doing business coaching for small businesses. And we helped small businesses grow. And we started our own small business in that mind frame. And it really taught me a lot. It taught me the nuts and bolts, how, I learned Wall Street, but then I learned Main Street. Like how do people really live? How do small business owners really go from working someplace and then building a business? And it was fascinating, learned a lot, and I taught a lot of different people some great skills, and their businesses took off. My brother and I helped create over 2,000 jobs here in Southeast Wisconsin alone, just through that process. And then, it dawned on me after the 2016 election. I just looked around and said, this is not the direction I think we should be going in this country. And I had a lot of discussions that summer before the election about leadership. And I just felt so strongly that Donald Trump is not the kind of leader that we wanted for our country. And I think it's been obvious that is true. And so probably that winter right after the election, I told my wife, I said, I think I want to run for Congress. And she looked at me funny, like, what are you talking about? And I said, Jim Sensenbrenner's been in Congress. He'll be in for 40 years. And I said, if someone like me, I'm a Navy veteran, small business owner, in business, if someone like me can't run as a Democrat in this deeply red district and change some people's minds, who can? Right. And I'm a big fan of, I tell my clients this all the time, you can either complain about something or do something about it, and you can't complain about it. So what are you going to do about it? So I looked around and said, if I don't do it, I have to wait for somebody else to take this on. Why don't I just do it? And I had no idea how to run a campaign, no idea how to do it, learned a ton. And met a lot of great people. We just went out, it's a lot like starting a small business. You gotta build a team, you gotta put the nuts and bolts in place, you gotta get out there and you gotta tell people your story, you gotta tell them about you. And I call it the campaign where we connected all the Democrats, because there had been nobody in the 5th congressional district, which is right in between Milwaukee and Madison. Nobody had gone out and said, hey, Democrats, let's be loud and proud, because they always thought everybody else was Republican, and it's not true. So we took a 70-30 district. So traditionally Sensenbrenner would win with 70% of the vote, and whoever ran against him got 30. And we closed it to 62-38. So we took a 40-point gap and turned it into a 24-point gap. But we knew we weren't done, because I knew we were still going down the wrong direction. We were able to help put a Democrat in our governor's mansion, though, which was key to changing the dynamic in the state. Tony Evers won by 38,000 votes. We flipped 24,000 of those. So by our efforts, we did a lot to make sure that we had a Democrat at the statewide level starting to change things. And then Sensenbrenner retired, and we had been making plans to run, but we jumped right back in. And, that was pre-COVID, because I think of the world right now as either pre-COVID or in COVID, because it's hard to remember what the heck we did before COVID. And, here we are today, though, and this pandemic has been so tragically handled at the national level. Your state's doing a lot better. Our state is just absolutely a train wreck, because the Republicans in our leadership have thwarted every effort by our governor to do anything. And we're averaging about 3,000 cases a day right now, which is just mind-boggling. It's worse than some countries around the world. And there's just no leadership in our Republicans right now are going to court to force our governor's mask mandate off the table, instead of just meeting and passing legislation to say, yes, we need a mask mandate, we need these other things. So I'm running against our state Senate Majority Leader, Scott Fitzgerald, who is I call him our own Mitch McConnell, because he's a tremendous obstructionist. And all he does is keep things from happening. That's his whole goal. And it's about their ideology as Republicans. They have no answers that government can solve. So because government can never be a solution, we're running this pandemic with no solutions coming from the Republican Party. So that's where we're at today. We're guessing we're somewhere about down 10 at this point, but I firmly believe that there's enough women in our district who are gonna flip it and put us over the top. And I'll get to go to Washington and start working on the things I really want to work on come January.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned how Michigan is doing pretty well right now, because I'm feeling nerve-wracked because Whitmer's emergency powers were just taken away.
Yeah, I just saw that.
I look at what's going on in Wisconsin and I'm like, man, we can't let that happen here. We've been doing so well. And, even because I have muscular dystrophy and juvenile diabetes, and I've really had to, stay pretty locked up under these conditions.
Mm-hmm.
But at least I feel like Whitmer has set the tone in our state a little bit for, this is serious. And I just feel like there's so much backlash against her caring about us all. So it's interesting to hear, it's like, just look at the evidence, people. It's not better over where they're not wearing masks and nothing's being enforced. So.
Right, but I never would imagine that we would have a pandemic be polarizing from a political standpoint. It's mind-boggling that the safety of people's constituents isn't important enough when people are screaming about their freedoms. And to me, it's just, I don't get it. I don't understand, but it's not something we can defeat logically. We can only defeat it at the ballot box. So we just have to
voted stickers, because I just voted right before we started this meeting, and I was so happy about it to vote early and get that done.
Right.
And I have, they could tell how excited I was, so they gave me a whole bunch of extras, and I decided I'm just gonna put one on every day.
Right.
That way, if anybody happens to see me, they'll see that I voted.
Right, exactly. Because that's what it is. That's where we're at right now. Unless you vote, things aren't going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And you kind of briefly mentioned, I think, the incumbent that you're competing against. Is it Sensenbrenner?
Well, Sensenbrenner retired, so it's actually an open seat. Okay. So this is, which doesn't happen very often in Wisconsin, but this is the second open seat this year. So, and Sensenbrenner had been there this is his 42nd year. So, yeah, he was my congressman when I turned 18.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm 58 and he's still my congressman. So that's just fundamentally wrong. He's been my congressman my entire adult life.
How do you feel about the need for term limits to be?
Yeah, I personally believe that gerrymandering needs to get solved, because if we solve gerrymandering, we'll be able to create districts that are much more even. Because I'm a big believer that you should be elected on your ideas, you should be re-elected on results, and gerrymandering takes that away.
Absolutely.
Gerrymandering gives you basically a safe seat if you win your primary.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is people run, either farther right or farther left in their primaries. And therefore, when they get to having to actually do things, there's no common ground.
Right.
So by ending gerrymandering, we have a chance to elect people where they have to find common ground to get reelected. And then I don't think we need term limits, because then people just, you either get stuff done or you get kicked out, is the way I would see it.
And that actually leads perfectly into my next question. You say on your campaign site that it shouldn't matter what political party you affiliate with, that we should be focusing on fixing what's broken about our system. And personally, one thing that I think is broken about our current system is the partisan politics and the inability for people to find common ground about what needs to happen to be better and be less divided. So what is your opinion of how we can begin to find common ground again and focus on what needs to change rather than who's to blame or who's...
Oh, I mean, it is interesting. So as a business coach, I've been teaching that principle for the last 15 years that if you're in blame or you're in excuses or reasons why things can't change, or you're in denial about that things need to change, it's hard to move forward. So I always think about how do we take responsibility, and then where does the accountability from the voters need to come from? Because it really is about, you know, and our tagline in our campaign is progress over partisanship, because we need to actually start doing some things. Climate crisis is something that unless we really get, you know, serious about the next couple of years, we're not going to have a chance to really solve it in a way that's going to be meaningful for a lot of people. Healthcare, you know, our healthcare system is broken. The pandemic has shown that it's even worse than we thought it was, and we need to move to universal healthcare, and we need to move as quickly as possible. Gun violence prevention. It's almost as if during this pandemic we forgot that there's even gun violence prevention. But you know, you look at what happened, you know, to your governor, where they arrested 13 people because they were a militia group who decided that they were going to take whatever ideas into their own hands and overthrow a sitting governor in one of our states. And the only reason they thought about it is because they're armed to the hilt. You know, they've been able to buy all these weapons and create this idea that they're a paramilitary force. It's crazy. And then income inequality. It's like income inequality has to be, you know, we need to start working on that immediately. And then just the pandemic. I'm so looking forward to the election, though, because right after the election, we'll be able to move to a national mask mandate. We'll put more money into getting PPE out to hospitals. We'll do more contact tracing and testing, and things will start to be different. And we'll have a culture where it's about, let's keep people safe so we can actually reopen the economy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too.
Mm-hmm.
And healthcare, getting into the issues. Healthcare, with the current pandemic being probably one of the most life-altering events many of us have ever experienced, is obviously on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. But even before COVID-19, you said that Wisconsin needs changes in healthcare, particularly because, quoting from your campaign site, middle-income families in Wisconsin spend about 11% of their income on healthcare-related expenses, and Wisconsin families pay more in deductibles than most of the country. You state that we must make healthcare insurance more affordable for families. How do you think that could be made doable?
Yeah, and I'll just say that we need to make health care more affordable, because I think insurance is part of the issue.
Yeah.
Is we don't really need an insurance business. The problem is there's about 3.5 million jobs in the insurance sector. So we need to figure out a way to how do we move and not disrupt too many people immediately, but have them get absorbed into a single payer plan or whatever. But the bottom line is everybody needs to get covered. Because as soon as we can get everybody covered, then we can start moving to a more proactive preemptive healthcare plan.
Mm-hmm.
So, because if we don't do that, people are just going to become sicker and sicker and use the worst possible outlets to manage their illnesses. And right now, the healthcare industry, and that's what I call it, the healthcare industry, is not interested in helping or curing people. It's interested in getting the most out of each transaction and then moving on, and hopefully they'll see you again, which it just sounds crazy when you think about it, because it's not then about healthcare results, it's about healthcare profits. And I just truly believe that healthcare should not be a for-profit entity. And that's where, you know, we have big pharma involved, you know, we have a whole bunch of different things. So I'm a big believer, if we lower the Medicare age to 50, if we backfill everyone else with Medicaid, then we can start moving and actually put a government option on the table. Then we can start moving toward getting everybody covered, and then we can start to lower healthcare costs, because we pay about $11,000 a person in healthcare in the United States. That averages, you know, it's almost half in other developed countries. So we pay twice as much for actually worse outcomes.
Right. Yeah. I've never understood how people that need durable medical equipment, for instance, for their disabilities, how it's so expensive and so hard to pay for the durable medical equipment that people need, that they end up sick breaking bones, and having horrible injuries, infections, so forth, because they can't afford to get what they need to be taken care of. Then they end up in an emergency room having to get emergency surgeries. And then when they can't pay the bill at the hospital, it comes out of the same pot.
Right. We all still pay it.
It's still,
It's like, okay, that way, I mean, we have a level of socialized medicine already because we refuse to let people, die on the streets, which, because we're a semi-compassionate country, and I say that semi-compassionate because we're not fully compassionate. If we were, we would have universal health care. That's part of the issue. But I think even, and this is the way I talk to business people about universal health care, is most business owners don't want to be involved in healthcare. Like, it's just, it's not part of their core business. It's not part of what they do. And just going through those mechanics of trying to pick the right healthcare, for their people and figuring out how to pay for it and what are the right deductibles and all this other stuff, they hate it. Yeah. And here's the thing, it actually holds down entrepreneurship. People can't start their own businesses very easily because you have to be able to afford your own insurance and you have to have no pre-existing conditions. And how many people actually have that or are able to do that? So it holds down our entrepreneurship in the United States, makes us less competitive. And the future of jobs is we're going to have much more automation and people are going to be disrupted out of their jobs on a regular basis. And if we don't have this great safety net for people to make sure they're covered from a health standpoint and re-education and training for whatever job they want to move to next, we're going to be leaving tons of people behind.
Yeah.
And to me, that just doesn't make any sense. And we know it's coming. We know this is the world we're going to be living in, and it's very soon. And we just need to start thinking about it and doing something about it right now.
Absolutely. As far as climate change is concerned, your campaign site mentions energy plants are now less expensive to build and operate than the cost of running existing coal plants. So it's not only better for the climate, it's a better investment financially. Mm-hmm. All those who are worried about the loss of jobs involved with renewable energy, what comfort and reason for supporting renewable energy do you have to offer them?
Well, green energy jobs are one of the fastest growing sector in our economy, and they're actually well-paying jobs and they're safe jobs. I mean, versus working in a coal plant or building solar panels, that's a no-brainer. People would want to have that solar panel job. But here's the interesting thing: is there are some incredible technological advancements that are going to happen in the next 10 years that are going to completely change our energy grid. I think we're going to have some level of cold fusion. I think we're going to have room temperature superconducting, which means that energy availability and cost is going to drop dramatically. And when that happens, which is going to happen very soon, when that happens, it'll be really interesting to see how we rebuild our energy grid and how easy it's going to be to use energy and how much, and almost our fossil fuel dependence, it'll drop dramatically. And that scares a lot of people. It scares everybody who's got billions of dollars invested in our fossil fuel infrastructure. It's not a coincidence they went and hired all the lawyers from the tobacco industry because they're the ones that are fueling the climate deniers at this point. Mm-hmm. Because the more you can do it, the more doubt you can put in people's heads. Like, well, because if you've ever talked to a climate denier, it starts with the earth isn't warming or changing. Then when they realize it is, they go, well, it's not caused by man. Then they say, well, yeah, right, it's caused by man, but there's nothing we can do about it. And, there is something we can do, but it's too expensive and we'll lose jobs. But all of those they're false, and they're false premises. And until we get over that, it's going to be hard to move forward. But fossil fuel subsidies need to end. And then we need to invest in a green energy grid immediately. Because I think it takes, if we covered 3% of our landmass in the United States, we could power everyone through solar. Problem is we just can't capture or store that energy right now. But if we had room temperature superconducting, we could ship all the energy out and people could keep it in batteries at their homes or whatever. There's lots of things that we can do. So, but it does need to be one of our highest priorities come January, because President Trump's going to pull us out of the Paris Accord on November 4th. Joe Biden's going to get us back in on January 21st, but that's not enough. Then we got to kick off all these other series of events.
Yeah. It's interesting, you just reminded me of an article I read about corporate socialism and how it's destroying capitalism. because the way that capitalism is meant to function is that when something isn't working anymore, or it's not doing the best for the people and for the economy,
Mhm.
and new industries take over.
Yes.
And because we keep providing kind of a boondoggle, and this includes healthcare to insurance companies, the
Right.
fossil fuel industry, all these things that if they need to keep being bailed out, then they're not succeeding. It's not
Right.
working.
Yep. Yeah, because corporations love socialism for them. They don't love it for people. And then the other part is just patents. I mean, patents itself. I mean, they're so bottled up right now, But there's a newspaper that started in Madison called The Onion, and they had an article back in I think it was the early 2000s. That said that and it was 310 million people at the time. 310 million people hired their own lobbyists to represent them in Washington, and it was meant to be funny. The problem is it's true because these corporations have figured out a long time ago that the return on investment of lobbyists is incredible. If I pay a lobbyist and put some money into it, I can get 1,000 to 10,000% return sometimes on my money by holding back competition, changing the dynamic of capitalism, because it's supposed to work that way. But I also believe, and I'll apply this to healthcare and education, is those should not be for-profit businesses, because the for-profit model doesn't work in those ideas. So
Yeah. So going back to guns, this seems like such a highly contentious topic, even though I've rarely heard anyone advocating for taking away people's Second Amendment rights. I don't hear that.
no.
I just hear a lot of people who want what you might call common sense gun reform.
Right.
And you stated that you firmly believe in protecting Second Amendment rights, but also in making these kinds of reforms because gun violence is a problem in Wisconsin too. Can you elaborate on that and what the reforms you're proposing would look like and how they aren't about taking anyone's right to bear arms?
Yeah, and I already know my opponent's he's gonna say that I'm gonna take away your guns. He's gonna say it because they say it about all Democrats. But I'm a gun owner. I used to be an NRA member. When I was a kid, I did a lot of hunting. And in Wisconsin, there's 750,000 people that go into the woods every deer hunting season. And that is part of our culture. But I will tell you right now, nobody hunts with an AR-15 because there's no deer meat left to be able to eat after you use a weapon like that. So there's lots of weapons that no one would ever hunt with that aren't made for hunting, they're made for killing.
Right.
And for us to be able to own those weapons freely in our homes with no oversight, to me, has never made any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. I think if you have a weapon and you buy a weapon, that you should have to buy insurance. And that insurance should cover the cost of the potential of that gun causing harm. Because we've got enough information right now, and that's one of the things that needs to change. We need to study it a lot more. We need the CDC to actually study it. But we already know that if you have a gun, there's a higher chance of somebody using it for a suicide or an accidental shooting in your home. We already know that.
Yeah.
And that has a healthcare cost. So you should have to have insurance to cover the cost of that. Because nowhere in the Second Amendment does it say guns should be cheap also.
Right. No.
So, and then I also believe that people should not be able to buy unlimited ammunition.
No.
I just think it's, and we just haven't addressed it for whatever reason. But, if I go to the pharmacy and want to buy Sudafed, I can only buy 2 maximum, and I have to show my ID to buy it. Why don't we do that with ammunition? I've never understood that. Like, no, you only need as much. If you're going hunting, you only need this much. Because I know as a hunter, like if you have to shoot more than once, you're not a very good hunter, right? You get laughed at. So to have to own all this ammunition just has never made any sense to me. And then the usual things, universal background checks, red flag laws. Here's the thing, 80% of people agree on all these things. But Mitch McConnell and then the guy I'm running against, our state senator, Scott Fitzgerald, they refuse to bring it to a vote. Mm. because they know in some of their districts, those people will lose an election against somebody who will say that they want to take their guns away, because that's the thing. So.
Yeah. And one of my recent interviews with another Democratic candidate in Texas, she was talking about this, and she was saying she grew up with guns. Her dad was a hunter. That's how we put food on the table for them, all of that kind of stuff. But she said, if you're brought up that way with guns and everything, you're supposed to be taught to respect the guns and respect the purpose of a gun. And she doesn't see that happen anymore. Like, people just parading them around like they're toys. Or
Why would you bring them into a Walmart? Or I actually went to a Black Lives Matter protest in one of our small towns, and there were all these guys with their guns, and there were women and children at this protest. That was pretty much it. It was just women and children, and there were all these guys with their guns. And I just thought, well, this is so stupid. What do you think you're trying to prove here, besides intimidation? Because that's about it.
I didn't have a question about that, but since you brought it up, what's been your experience so far with those protests? Have you just gone to the one, or?
Well, we've been watching them because we've had the Kenosha incident. As part of my district, there's a city called Wauwatosa, and there have been protests the last couple of days because there's a police officer on the force who has killed 3 people in 5 years, and he's still part of the force. And people want him held accountable, and their fire and police commission won't do anything at this point. It's been recommended at a minimum he be fired, and they still haven't taken any action. And the DA yesterday came down with whether they were going to charge him or not in this latest shooting where he shot a teenager in the back and killed him. And the DA just didn't have, it was obvious the DA wasn't going to be able to charge this officer, but everybody knew that was wrong. And so there were protests last night. And, the problem is when there's protests, there's also a small group of people who want to cause trouble. So after the protests, there were also some riots. And the problem is people think the people rioting are the same people protesting, and it's just not true.
Right.
And so we've had some real challenges here in Wisconsin.
I watched a lot of, the firsthand footage that comes out on.
Yeah, you just watch. It's like these guys come in, they're just going to try to start some trouble. And then the police officers escalate the situation. They did last night. And here's the most outrageous thing is the teenager's family was driving in a car as part of the protest. They pulled the car over and they dragged the family out. Dragged them out. The mother's head hit the pavement. She had a big knot on her forehead. She probably broke her arm. And the police were like, sorry, but you deserved it because you were out after curfew. And so this is what we're up against, though, and this is where we are. And one of the things that I keep talking about is just systemic racism, and how we absolutely positively have to start moving toward dismantling systemic racism. In Milwaukee County in April of 2019, they passed a ordinance that declared racism to be a public health crisis. And what that did is that kicked off a whole bunch of mechanics about how Milwaukee County runs their government, including when they did their budget this year for next year, it had to be done through the lens of racial equity. And it's one of the things I want to do when I get to Washington, which is let's start budgeting through the lens of racial equity to make the budgeting process and the results of the budget more equitable. But if we don't start when it comes to the budget, the criminal justice system, education, income, you name it, jobs, there's a lot of work to do. But it starts with the system, because I've never met anybody who is racist that I think I can ever, try to talk them out of it.
No.
Individual racism, I think we're just going to have to wait them out. But systemic racism, that can be changed.
Yes, it can. I believe that. Okay, so I love Wisconsin cheese curds. Food is.
That should everybody, I just want to say, right?
Food is one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's one of the foods that Wisconsin's well known for. Do you have a favorite food or dish that you associate with your home state or your local region that you live in?
Well, it's hard to find them anywhere else, but deep fried cheese curds are phenomenal, right? I mean, it's just like, okay, that is something that I got to have every once in a while. But I love beer. I love all the breweries that are popping up everywhere. Brats and cheese curds but the thing is, my wife and I try to eat as healthy as possible. So we don't do that all the time, but what we really look for is, and my wife's a fantastic cook. So we try to do locally sourced, we try to do organic, and we really try to eat as healthy as possible. And the problem is it's a lot more expensive than just eating a different way. And to me, this is one of our biggest challenges is why is eating healthy the most expensive way to eat?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
An article, I should send it to you after this interview though, about the whole food justice movement,
Yeah.
how some things, not all, but some things in the food justice movement are not necessarily based on evidence.
Yes.
And instead of actually helping with racial and class, my phone started ringing, class inequality,
Yeah.
they actually contribute to furthering the divide and the stereotypes. And it was really interesting because I think some things have been so deeply ingrained into our thinking that this is what's good and this is what's not, that we're overlooking how that believing certain things without checking the evidence behind it can actually hurt people more. So I totally went off on another tangent there.
But it's a huge topic. Everybody eats, like we all eat, and how we eat, where we eat from, because we went, everybody's eating a box of cereal from Michigan, right? I mean, because it's like every single cereal is made in Michigan. But as a kid, it's like it almost was like the food industry went and became industrialized.
Yeah.
And became like the farther away your food was, the more it had to have preservatives and everything else in it. And now we've seen the last 10 years shift that back. And there's a lot more local sourcing, local growing, everything else. And I think that's the trend that we need to continue, especially in cities, because I think there's a lot of cities that have food deserts, and there really need to be there needs to be a lot more just farms, just ways for people to be able to grow their own food. And it's happening, but it's not happening fast enough.
Yeah. I live in Detroit, and yeah, that's a big issue here. I really didn't expect it to be such a huge difference because I grew up in the suburbs, of Detroit, and I've only been living in Detroit for a little over a year now. But it was significantly different trying to find grocery stores.
Yes.
In the suburbs, there's every other street there's a big market, and like here,
right. You've got like 5 grocery stores to choose from that are all within a mile, and then you go to some places and there's nothing for 5 miles.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a big thing to be thinking about for the future too, I think. So I'm to my last question, which I've decided this is how I'm ending all my interviews from now on. What's the question I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked, that you would like for your constituents, the people in your district, to know about you, and what's your answer?
We need to get back to a semblance of respect in a 2-party system. I feel like there's only one party that's trying to actually get things done right now, and there's another party that is, I don't even know what they're doing at this point on the national level. I don't know what the Republicans' plan is, because it's now just you either are in lockstep with Donald Trump or you're not, and you're not even part of the party anymore. And it seems like the state governments have fallen along the same line. We need a strong 2-party system that believes in some kind of differences in policy, so we can have good policy debates and come to conclusions and start working on our issues. Because if we don't get back to there, we're going to have endless discussions about character, about, you know, just all the norms that have been broken over the last 4 years. It's exhausting. The country is a high level of anxiety that has to end. And I'm so looking forward to the Trump administration not being there anymore, because everyone's going to take a big, huge breath and a sigh of relief. And then we can get back to, let's start doing something.
Yes.
And that's what I'm really looking forward to. And I you know, watching people, because the pandemic has just, it's just created these huge fissures and cracks and things that sort of worked somewhat well, but now don't work well at all.
If you took Trump out of the equation and you took, you know, rhetoric out of the equation, and you talk to people about what they want in their life, you end up finding out that we're not that different. Most people want the same things. But as soon as Trump or Biden or, you know, character and rhetoric come into it, it's just like you can't, you hit a brick wall.
Right.
And it's so frustrating, because I personally used to have a lot more hope in being able to influence, you know, others, thinking by just, you know, showing empathy and listening to them. But I feel like so often now it's just impossible to have a conversation with somebody.
It's actually a little bit sad, because because I'll have conversations with people, and then when they find out I'm a Democrat, the conversation ends. And, you know, we were actually getting somewhere, because I'm a firm believer that as people, we can agree on about 80% of anything, right? We can agree on a lot of first steps we can take. And that's how you solve things. You take steps. You don't come up with one solution and that's the way it's going to work, because it doesn't work that way.
Right.
But the bottom line is we need to end gerrymandering to get the extremes out. And right now the extremes are running because they're the ones shouting the loudest in order to raise money. And until we also remove money from politics, or at least the overall threat of money to politics, we're going to continue to get this. I guess I'll throw this out there. One more thing I'm a big fan of is not just campaign finance reform, but campaign reform. We literally should make elections no more than 3 months, because there just isn't a reason for it. And in fact, it keeps us from doing the job, because we can't do things because we're going to have an election. We have to wait for the election, or we have to argue. I can't even compromise because I might not get reelected. So we really need to narrow that down, because I've been running for 3.5 years for a 2-year job. And they're going to want me on, you know, January, whatever, as soon as I'm sworn in, to start fundraising again. And I'm going to say, no, I want to get to work, because that's what I want. That's why I'm here. I want to get something done.
Yeah.
So that's the cycle that we have to break. And it's going to take some time, but I believe we can do it.
Good, good. All right, Tom. Well, it's been fun. And thank you so much for talking with us, letting us to get to know you. Just one more question that I didn't have on here. Do you have any pets? Trump doesn't have any pets, and I think it's really weird that he's never had a pet.
Well, it is. I'm not sure that even makes sense to me. But we have 2 rescue dogs. They're both Chihuahua Terrier mixes. They're crazy little dogs. They're the ones that bark all the time, but they're awesome. So, because my wife and I, well, we were empty nesters. We have one back right now, but so we've had a dog. We had a golden retriever for many years, and she passed on. But yeah, we have these 2 little rescue dogs. They're hilarious.
That's great.
They keep us on our toes, and they're a lot of fun. How about you? Do you have a pet?
Yes, we well, my husband's dad has a husky, and we thought that he was going to be moving in with us because he's a handful for his dad, but his dad ended up not being able to part with him. But we also have a cat, and my daughter just yesterday took in a stray kitten.
Of course.
So now we have 2.
Yeah.
And we have a bunny, Oliver.
Nice.
And we have a corn snake.
So you have the beginnings of a zoo. which is
Yeah.
fantastic. Right.
Yeah.
I do want to say one more thing because
My grandpa
you're.
was a zoologist, and
Oh, okay.
he's written books on animals. And my mom grew up getting to play with lion cubs. She had like
Oh, wow.
a fairy
Okay.
tale kind of, getting to play with wild animals at the zoo and everything like that. So that's something
Very cool.
that I've always been jealous of her because, he died shortly after I was born. But I think it's one of those genetic things. Like, if you love animals, you love animals.
Well, I think once you're around an animal that shows you unconditional love, it's hard not to have that. And
Exactly.
because the dogs they're never displeased to see you. They're always happy. So
Exactly.
I did want to say one more thing though. You have this huge Star Wars stuff going on behind you. So Mark Hamill endorsed our campaign. So I was very excited by that, and like everyone else freaked out, but I'm like, that's pretty cool to have Luke Skywalker at least tweet out about our campaign. So that was
He's been doing some amazing
yes
work for endorsing the Democratic Party.
Yeah, he has, and we're very fortunate to have people who have a larger platform speaking up for us. Very grateful for that.
Yeah. This my husband is Star Wars and Lego. He's gotten me into the Lego thing too. So like, we have Harry Potter Legos on this side of the room, and
Okay.
Star Wars Legos on this side of the room. And I swear, if people walked into a house that didn't know us already, they'd be like, "Is this a children's museum or what's going on here?" But it's fun, brings us joy, and we're stuck in here, so we might as well make it fun, right?
Got to do something for fun. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been really, really fun talking to you. And
I enjoyed it.
Everybody at RSR is rooting for you. You and all the other Democratic candidates that I've talked to. And you all have so much in common as far as your basic principles and core beliefs. And it's funny that the whole not wanting to get away from this partisanship and find common ground. We have one that calls themselves a bipartisan Democrat, Devin Pandy.
Yes. Yeah, Devin's great. Yep.
And a rural ranch Democrat, which meant, more of a red rural area that she's running in, and just being able to relate to the people there. So it's like you guys all have the same idea of wanting to come back to a place where we can talk about the things that actually matter. And so
we're all people.
Right.
So
it's been fun, and thank you again. And I'm going to stop talking because if I don't, I'm going to end up keeping you on here for another hour. So you have a good night.
All right, you too. Thank you very much. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.